I'm Taylor Holliday. I'm the CEO of Common Thread Collective. We're an e-commerce growth agency that focuses on brands driving predictable, profitable growth. And I'm here today to talk about the future of your bank account, which is just an Elevar themed way of saying we're going to talk about finance. And in particular, we're going to talk about the overlap of marketing and finance, which has sort of been my passion over the last year, to try and help brands think about how their marketing tactics produce financial outcomes. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that's so important today. But first, I'll tell you a little story. So, Charleston is a place that is very near and dear to my heart, despite I am from California. It is the setting for my most watched piece of content ever. And as somebody who's been creating content for 10 years, that's not necessarily a good thing because I made this video 15 years ago. It is me proposing to my wife in Battery Park down the street. If you've ever been over there, I surprised her with a boy band song and dance proposal in the park with 3 of my friends. It's incredibly embarrassing to watch. It's got about 1 million views at its peak before it got taken down for copyright infringement on High School Musical's theme song. So that's exciting. And this place is, my wife went to school here. I'm very close to Charleston. In fact, I played for the Charleston River Dogs. That's how we met. My first life was I was a professional baseball player in the Yankees organization and their minor league affiliate right down the street here in Charleston. And when I played for the River Dogs, I played alongside the gentleman next to me in the photo. He was a young man by the name of Carmen Angelini, and he was an 18-year-old just drafted out of high school when we played together. Okay? And I was drafted in the 19th round as a 22-year-old out of college, and I signed for $20,000. Okay? Not very much money at the time. Lived in an apartment with about 5 people. It was about the size of this stage on air mattresses while playing. That's kind of the life. But Carmen signed out of high school for $1 million. Okay? 18-year-old kid out of Louisiana, tiny town, $1 million. Here's the thing. I was better than Carmen. Okay? But every day I showed up to the ballpark, I would see Carmen's name in the lineup ahead of mine. It drove me nuts. Why is this kid playing in front of me? All the time, every day, and I grew bitter and frustrated because I had come out of college, and the thing about playing college sports, if anybody's done it, it's all about team and winning. And in the minor leagues, there's a big change. You're now competing with your teammates for a spot. It's about money and opportunity. Winning is inconsequential at the minor league level. Doesn't matter. That was confusing to me. I didn't understand it. And this culminated with the last game of our season in Charleston. We had a chance to make the minor league playoffs, which all year long, nobody cared about winning. Then all of a sudden we have this chance, and our coach comes to us before the game and he says, team, today Taylor's gonna start because he's gonna give us the best chance to win. And I was infuriated. That made me so mad. Why hadn't I been playing all year long if I gave us the best chance to win? Why was Carmen playing? Well, the answer was really simple, because they gave him $1 million. And what I didn't understand was that from the Yankees' point of view, I was an older, low-level investment, and so to get a return on their money, they were going to give Carmen all the reps, all the coaching, all the opportunity, because he was where their money was. And this was a business about money. And what I didn't understand at that time was that the rules of the game had completely changed, and I wasn't ready. And I missed it. And it cost me probably a lot of my career in the way that I handled that. I was immature. I didn't really understand. And what I want to contend for everybody in this room is we're living through something very similar right now. Is that the same thing has happened in e-commerce. The rules of the game have completely changed over the last 18 months. We've gone from a game that was exclusively about revenue growth to a game that's about profit. It's about the ability to produce a financial outcome that's accretive to shareholders on an operating income or EBITDA level. And that's a completely different game than the one we've been playing for the past 4 years. If we look at the heroes of the last era, many of these people who have been on stages like this, have been in the podcasts we've listened to, on the magazines we've all read, Allbirds and Stitch Fix and Solo Brands and Warby Parker and Figs and Peloton. This is what they look like now. As an asset class, publicly traded e-commerce companies might be the worst asset class in history. Like if you thought NFTs were bad, you'd have been better off holding Bored Ape Yacht Club than any of these companies. Look at that, Allbirds 93%, Stitch Fix down 90%, Solo Brands down 90%, Warby Parker 80%, Figs 85%, Peloton 90%. That's a lot of retail left holding the bag. And you know what the effect of that is? Oh, sorry about my slide transition here. When the pressure happens at the public markets, where there's no money to be made, there's a downward pressure on the entirety of the market. market. Venture dollars disappear. Venture investments are down 97% since their peak in 2021. In 2021, there was almost $4.5 billion plowed into our industry. You guys remember it, right? 2021, it's a good time. If you thought that event was fun last night from Avi and the crew, we'd have been on a yacht in 2021, right? It was a lot frothier. It was a good time. In addition to that, though, it's not just the venture dollars that dried up. Interest rates changed, right? SBA loans, which are one of the primary vehicles for funding for e-commerce businesses, especially acquisitions in the early stage e-commerce market, went from an interest rate in August of 2020 that was 2.27 to an interest rate this month on the 10-year or 25-year that is 6.7%. So the culmination of that is you have a 97% decrease in venture dollars and you have a 200% increase in the cost of debt. Net result, there's no more money. It's all gone. That means that brands now have to produce their own cash. Okay, this is a fundamentally different thing to do than to grow your business on the back of financing. And so when the availability of capital changes, brands are forced to self-fund their own growth. But the problem is, e-commerce at the start is almost always cash destructive. This is a really bad business model for generating cash. Here's what I mean. Let's imagine I'm starting a new business. I have a beautiful new little Bernedoodle puppy. Her name's Jack. I used AI to create this really cool logo for my new business, the Charleston Chew Toys. And let's imagine I have an initial investment of $10,000. I find a manufacturer that's going to make me a beautiful chew toy at a $50 cost of good. I place an initial PO for 200 units. I've got an MSRP of $100, so I got about 50% gross margin, not too bad for an initial PO of an e-commerce business. And I get back my $20,000 in retail value of inventory, and I'm set to go run my business. $10,000 investment, $20,000 in retail value, pretty good. All right, right? Here's the problem. I have to go pay to acquire customers, right? And this is out of our data platform, Statless. We service about $4 billion in GMV, about $500 million in spend every year. And on an aggregate basis, the median AMER, so new customer revenue divided by ad spend, so the efficiency of new customer acquisition, the median result is about a 2.35, or about a 40% cost of acquisition, cost of sales, if you will. So if we take that and we apply it on a unit economic basis, this is what that result looks like. I have a $100 AOV on my product. I've got $50 in COGS. I've got $10 in shipping and fulfillment. I got $2 for my payment processor. I got 41 bucks to Uncle Zuck. Net result, minus $3 in contribution per order. And that's generous for a startup e-commerce business. The idea that you're going to produce a median result out of my data set, which is mainly 8-figure businesses and above, is not likely true. And 50% gross margin on your first order is likely not true, right? So it often is much, much worse than that. And if we think about the total value then, my $20,000 in revenue very quickly deteriorates down to minus $600 in contribution margin, which means I'm left with less money in my bank account than I started with. Now, you amplify this by the fact that I had to order more inventory before that inventory ran out, and you see the problem. This thing of buying physical objects on long lead times to maybe someday sell it at some marginal value is a bad cash conversion mechanism. Now, that's okay in the early days when financing is available. Right? I can fund the development of that growth and create leverage over time by building my existing customer base, by building manufacturing leverage for larger POs, et cetera, and that charade of moving money around and floating it on my credit card and all the things that we've all done works for a while. But then suddenly when this market shifts and the capital disappears, this is what happens. We see this wake of bankruptcies, right? We've all read them every day in the news now. There's more and more of them, and it's not just on the brand side. You may have been following the news yesterday that one of the biggest lenders, Ampla, if any of you have money in Ampla, I might go try and get that over to your bank account real quick. Like the book of business, it's happening everywhere. There is pressure on every business right now because they have large amounts of inventory on their balance sheet based on demand that existed in COVID and doesn't anymore, about the inability to finance their business going forward, and the slew of bankruptcies is going to continue. Our market and our industry is resetting to a new model. But that's okay. That's actually going to be a healthy process for us. And capitalism is a really powerful vehicle. And what it does is it brings margin innovation. It brings a lot of the things we're talking about here today in this business, or in this conference, and the ones that you're hearing about. And it brings a new set of measures to the forefront of focus. In the last era, you tracked things like revenue and spend and ROAS and customers and LTV and how many stores were opened. But today we talk about free cash flow and contribution margin and EBITDA and supplier terms and return on invested capital. And so as marketers, which is mainly the group that I'm speaking to, it's time for us to increase our level of sophistication in our ability to impact these measures. Because brands now crave predictable, profitable growth. This is the modus operandi of all businesses that we work with, from the big ones to the small ones. Predictable, profitable growth. How can I understand how to go out and make a PO with a clear vision for how much value I'm going to create off the back of it so that I can manage cash because I can't get capital. And so I have to be disciplined about this. So that's the context for which we have been serving customers in our business across the last decade, but really in the last 12 months with a totally new, novel approach to the needs that businesses have. And through that, we've been able to discover a set of patterns that exist amongst the brands that work and turn them into frameworks for helping to think about how they could apply to your businesses. So today I'm going to give you 3 frameworks you can apply today to ensure you build a business that builds your bank account. At the end of the day, that's the point of all of this. Turns out the goal of business is to make money. So number 1, this is what I call 4-quarter accounting. Okay, sometimes not having a background in a thing when you go and look at it gives you fresh eyes. And I was a baseball player who walked into entrepreneurship. And so the first time I saw a P&L for an e-commerce business, it didn't make any sense to me. I was like, why is it ordered this way? Why is shipping all the way down here? And why is my marketing dollars up here? Why is it organized this way? Now, I've come to understand what GAAP accounting is and the principles are, but I don't care because I'm not an accountant. So I don't want to organize my P&L like that. I don't want to look at it that way because it doesn't drive insight for me about where my profit is going. So I created a much simpler rubric, and I call it 4-quarter accounting. It works like this. You divide your P&L up into 4 very simple categories. Number 1, CAC. This is e-commerce. Most of the dollars go to marketing. I want to see those first. So I would define CAC as customer acquisition costs, all direct response advertising dollars. These are the dollars that you spend for the purpose of generating revenue on your website. The second category is COGS is a bad term for our industry. Okay, it's too limited. There are more variable costs associated with the fulfillment of every order. I call it cost of delivery. This is this term I've made up. It refers to all variable expenses associated with getting the product to the customers. This includes COGS, shipping, fulfillment, and your payment processor fees. Sometimes people will include customer service in there. The idea is if the expense goes up as orders go up, it goes in that bucket. And then the third is your OPEX, your fixed expenses. This is your payroll, this is all your software, this is your big office, whatever it is, all your fixed expenses. And then the remaining bucket is what's left over, it's profit. Now, to be clear, almost no business I've ever seen perfectly divides into 25% categories. That's not the point. The point is to be able to look at it and get a glimpse of where the money's going by category over time so you know where you have opportunity to improve. Okay? So this is a sample D2C breakdown of a healthy business might look something like this. 20% CAC, or a 5-to-1 MER, or a 20% ACoS, whatever term you use to refer to the percentage of marketing as a percentage of revenue, 40% cost of delivery, 20% OPEX, and 20% profit. That'd be a really healthy business. Now, a lot of them actually look something like this. 28% CAC, 50% cost of delivery, 32% OPEX, and they're losing money. And part of what sent me down this path is businesses would come to me with this profile. And you know what the solution that they wanted me, the marketing agency, to solve for? What do you think it was? Reduce CAC. The problem with this business isn't CAC. But yet, that's the only obvious lever. Make my marketing more efficiency, better ROAS, more dollars. Okay, hold on. What about this bloated OPEX? What about too many people? What about the office? What about all the things that we've got here that are spending way too much money? What about the margin profile of this product? Where's it going? Oh, well, we have this warehouse and we got this bad deal in fulfillment. They're charging us $3 a pick and da-da-da-da. Okay, well, it's not a marketing problem. This is a go back and negotiate with your vendors problem. And over and over and over and over again, people would come to me asking me to improve the efficiency of their marketing to solve for an underlying fundamental business problem. Over and over and over again. So finally, we got to see it. So now we do FP&A for all of our customers. We have all of their P&Ls, and we work them through this. Okay, what should payroll as a percentage of revenue be? Where are your costs deteriorating? What can we do to improve the margin profile? Because here's the reality of marketing. The bounds of possible outcome are very clearly defined. If you were to produce a bell curve of the outcomes of Meta new customer acquisition, there is a clear range that is very tightly bound. There is no 70-to-1 ROAS on Meta. right? The median outcome's about a 1.8 to 1. Okay? It's about a 60% CAC. And if you can make money at a 60% CAC on Meta, you can build a very big business. Even better if you can do it at a 1.4. Because the power of these acquisition engines, a lot of people think it's efficiency, but it's actually volume of efficiency. Meta is a giant platform with millions and billions of people on it. So if you can build a business that can win at a lower ROAS, you can be really, really successful. And the way you do that, the leverage point in e-commerce is a lean OpEx. I'm in the human services business. My business is all people costs. It's like 60% payroll as a percentage of revenue. E-commerce, tiny, 10%. That's the goal for payroll. Get lean on your staff. It's operating leverage is the point of the business. When you do that, now you can get this right-sized and working. So what we do is we build this table at the bottom of every P&L. The table includes 4-quarter accounting tracked every month and key operating metrics, and you attach it automated to the bottom of every P&L. Good news for you, don't worry about screenshotting that. I gave you a template. Take a screenshot of that, and you'll get a Google Sheet that will give you what we think is the perfect P&L. It's going to be a P&L inclusive of 4-quarter accounting. You open that, you'll get dropped into a Google Sheet, and it's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. Here's what I would say about this P&L. Don't give it to your accountant. That's not the point. I'm not filing your taxes with this P&L. This is what you're going to distribute to your company. This is how you're going to begin to build an organization that thinks about financial outcomes, is by every month working together to look at a categorized, rolled up P&L. It doesn't have a full chart of accounts, nobody's salaries listed in there, but it's gonna give you as an organization a view and accountability to producing financial results. If you don't currently use a financial document as the center point of measurement in your organization, I would recommend you change that today. The point is a financial result. Have your organization work towards the thing you care about. I own a business, okay? I want my people to drive value for me, the shareholder. How do I do that? I produce incremental cash for myself over time. Let's show them how much cash there is and give them goals about improving the cash, if that's my goal. Okay, number 2. Second framework, quality of life score. Okay, this is a fun one. So you may have seen quality of life score as a measure for what's the best city in America or developing nations. We look at quality of life score a lot. Well, in e-commerce, this is intended to help you think about a rate factor for the increase of fixed costs. Over the last 2 years, the biggest killer I've seen for brands is what I like to call lifestyle inflation. Your business grew. There was venture funding, there was financing, maybe you were even profitable during COVID. You paid everybody a little bit more, you got a little bit bigger office. That photo shoot that used to be just you and a buddy is now 5 people in catering and hair and makeup and a big thing, and the cost just... And all of a sudden there's a new standard for lifestyle. And this is just like our personal lives. It's really hard if I've gotten used to here to go back to here. It's the hardest thing to do as people because you have a set expectation about your lifestyle, okay? But the hard part is, and we get asked this question all the time, is, well, what should it be? What is moderation for an e-commerce business? How do I think about what my fixed cost should be relative to the size of my business? Well, we're gonna give you a rule that's gonna help you avoid these kinds of problems. So this isn't to pick on Gymshark. Gymshark's actually one of the best businesses in our space, but we see stories like this all the time where they open new gigantic headquarters with all these jobs. Next thing you know, there's layoffs happening. I have sat in so many businesses that have giant empty warehouses for commercial leases that they signed during the bull market that they're now committed to for a long time, so that warehouse is sitting empty and they're desperately trying to find something to do with it. Be very cautious of the fixed costs you take on in obligation as a business, and the key is to tie them in this equation. So this is your equation for quality of life score to ensure that you are maintaining an appropriate relationship between the size of your business and your fixed costs, okay? So what you want to do is you want to look at your returning customer contribution margin divided by your fixed costs, and you want them to be in proportion to one another. So imagine this. Imagine next month you acquired no new customers. Would you survive? Would your business be profitable? Because the reason this is so important is because new customer acquisition comes at very, very slim margins. Because there's a CAC associated with it. Most of the margin gets deteriorated in the cost of acquisition on new customers in particular. Most of our ad dollars, especially for earlier businesses, are going to new customer acquisition. So if I can fund my new customer acquisition at $0 in contribution margin and still be profitable, you can grow very quickly. and you can do it in a healthy way, and you can offset months of deteriorated CAC and be all right. But if you're depending on new customer acquisition to be highly efficient and generate large amounts of contribution dollars, you are creating a really challenging task for yourself. So the way you should do this is just every month, break your revenue, look at it by first order revenue and returning customer revenue. Look at and the good news about returning customer revenue is it's the easiest part of your business to model and forecast accurately. If you've ever done cohort-specific LTV forecasting, looking at the performance of your customers over time, it's the most accurate way to predict revenue. And so your returning customer revenue is actually fairly stable. Now, there's a relationship to your new customer acquisition for sure, and you can't live on it forever. It will deteriorate over time. But it is fairly easy to predict. And so you can look at that new returning customer revenue, minus all the variable expenses associated with it, the cost of goods, the fulfillment, the payment processor fees, and any ad spend that you're spending on retention. Some of you might be spending money on your existing customer base, on Meta or other places, and figure out what that number is. That's your fixed cost expense. That's how much you get for payroll. That's how much you get for software. That's how much you get for your office. And I want you to think about it on this scale, okay? At 1, where they're perfectly proportional, we're living in moderation. We're in a good place. We are treating our fixed expenses in a healthy way. If you've moved up to 10 to 1, where you have 10 times the amount of returning customer revenue to fixed expenses, you might be living in a bit of scarcity. There might be opportunity to actually go make investment. But if you're closer to this 0.01 range, where your fixed expenses are substantially larger than your returning customer revenue, you might be living in entitlement. You might be paying yourself more than your business is worth. You might have too many employees. You have too much cost relative to the amount of revenue that you have. Now, here's the challenging part, okay? If you're the kind of business that doesn't produce a lot of LTV off the customers you acquire, maybe you're selling wallets or mattresses or things that don't compound, you are going to have a very lean organization for a very long time because you don't compound your existing customer revenue very quickly, and every month you have to go acquire new customers. So when you see, I think a good example of this is we all know Sean Frank from Ridge. Ridge Wallet's a great example of this kind of business where they have almost no LTV in their product category, and they spend 50% of their revenue every month on marketing, and they do it because they have a very lean OpEx. Great gross margin, lean OpEx, tons of marketing dollars, still profitable. And that has to be the case often when you don't have a lot of LTV. Now, the dream state, the best businesses in the world in e-com, the ones that get to 50 million in revenue at 40% margin, 40% operating income, this business runs at over $50 million. That happens in e-commerce. It's hard to believe, but it really does, and it works like this. If you compound your existing customer revenue quickly, this is a brand with high LTV, okay? And you hold new customer acquisition constant or even just slightly increase it at the same expense every month, your margin will widen over time because more of your revenue every month will come from existing customers. Think about that. You hold new customer acquisition constant. You grow your customer file every month. And the next month, the percentage of revenue that comes from non-paid acquisition grows every month. Your margin widens over time. If you're patient, you can build a really big business very profitably doing that. What people do, though, is in light of that, they scale up their new customer acquisition, deteriorate the profit to try and grow faster because they have some rush timeline in their head relative to the expectation, and the margin gets destroyed on a new customer contribution level. But if you hold that constant, new customer acquisition, either break even or slightly profitable, and I just compound my existing customer revenue over time, you can win at this game. If you have a 10-year horizon, it's a way to build a very big, profitable e-commerce business. I call this the Mona Lisa of e-commerce. This is the graph we should all aspire to have. Okay, the third thing, and this is probably the biggest change, and it applies primarily to those of you that have control over the equity and capital in your business. Most of the marketing efforts that we work on today exist for the sake of the P&L. It's about creating TTM EBITDA, because we're all trying to sell the business, and that's usually what multiples are based on, okay? But there's a problem with EBITDA that I see all the time for businesses. You can't eat it. It's not liquid. I know lots of businesses, one of my closest customers, for a long time, they got to 40 million in revenue at 20% margin and had $0 in distributions that they'd ever taken in the history of the business. $8 million in profit on their, because, you know why? Large apparel business. You know where all that money was? Anybody guess? What? Inventory. It's on the balance sheet. Because as your business is growing really fast, you have to buy more and more and more inventory. And in apparel, you do it a little worse, a little worse, a little worse. I got a bunch of extra colors. They're all there, and it just piles up and piles up. And you've got this big number on your balance sheet. And here's the secret, y'all. It's bullshit. The retail value is actually 0. But you're putting it there like it's actually got retail value, but it doesn't. It has less than 0 likely value. And so you accrue all of the money. You could look out in the warehouse and go, that's all my money for the business that I built, and none of it's in my pocket. And this is what happens in e-commerce all the time. So an alternative frame for this is to start to do what I call cash-based marketing. And this is where the goal of the marketing efforts is actually to generate cash, not P&L level profit. And it's not to say that you want to sacrifice those, and it's really important that you understand and you can direct your organization towards how you plan to create liquidity. If you want to sell your business, it's likely going to be sold on a multiple of TTM EBITDA, and you should pursue the P&L as the primary measure of that. But if you're not, and you want to create freedom for yourself and the ability to create distributions that put money in your pocket, then a better way is to think about cash-based marketing, and it works like this. It starts at the inventory level, okay? At the end of the day, e-commerce is functionally just buying an object and trying to sell it for more money. It is a bet repeatedly that I can buy something for cheaper than I can sell it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. We're just glorified garage flippers, okay? That's what happens over and over again. And so what I need to understand is every time I buy any individual SKU, I have made a bet on the marginal value of that SKU. Here's the thing, when I make bets, I'm wrong a lot. Sometimes I think the marginal value of that SKU is one thing, and it turns out the market is actually something else. And I have to be honest about the reality of what the market is telling me about the value of those units. But it starts with an intimate understanding of the present state of my inventory. So a simple way to do this is to take your inventory positions, and I would, as a good measure of data integrity, I would encourage all of you to keep your inventory counts in Shopify as accurate as possible. It's a good data hygiene practice. It will allow external vendors to integrate into the API, to get those counts, to build things like this really simply. And what I would do is I would take a count of your remaining inventory. I would keep a track of your average weekly sales. And then I would track how many days of inventory you have remaining based on your average weekly sales. Now, you could do this in different periods. You could do this on last 3 days if you have a lot of changes in sales velocity. You could do this on a larger window if it's slower, whatever you want. But come up for some period of the velocity of the sale of that unit, okay? And what that gives you then is days of inventory remaining. It's a really important metric for e-commerce, okay? How many days of inventory remaining do I have? And then what we're going to do is we're going to create an inventory grade for different categories of product. Okay, so we talked about the formula for days of inventory remaining, inventory count divided by average unit sales per day. Then the next piece of information we need is days of inventory remaining divided by the days of production time. Okay, so if I need to place a new PO for my Charleston Chew toys that I created, and it's 6 months to manufacture that product, that's 180 days of lead time. Okay? Ideally, I have what's called just-in-time inventory. In other words, I'm receiving the next batch of product just as the other one disappears, right? That's the way to maximize my cash position and ensure I don't have a balance sheet full of too much inventory. But what that means is if I start seeing my inventory count, my inventory grade moving up to where I have basically 5 times the lead time of inventory remaining, I've either got a sales velocity focus problem, or I've got a demand problem, or I ordered way too much shit. One of those things, right? So if I can create a grade, and the grade for you, I would say how tightly you want to hold these categories of A grade, B grade, and C grade is relative to your cash risk. Not all inventory has the same risk level. If your inventory goes bad over a certain period of time, it has a higher risk level. If you have an evergreen SKU that you sell year-round, less risk. If you have a seasonal product, more risk. Okay? I learned a lot about this because we worked with Ann Taylor Loft for a long time. And that is the biggest apparel retailer you can ever imagine. The amount of volume that they do on their e-commerce website would blow your mind. I had no idea. Now, I'm not a 40-year-old woman, so I don't think I was necessarily ever their customer, but it's insane the amount of volume that they do. But they know something about seasonal product. And they know that when they release a seasonal capsule for a quarter, at the end of that quarter, that inventory's got to go. Because once that blouse is out of style, it's dead inventory. And so their marketing team's job is, in that period of time that we are selling this product, we start at full price, and we try our damnedest to sell all of it at full price, but the second we can't, it's going on discount because it's gotta go. Because I'm not gonna sit on this on the balance sheet forever. I'm gonna learn and reflect on what I did in that period, but when that season is over, the inventory is gone. And this is that principle that gets you to what I call cash-based marketing. And it works like this, okay? You have these three categories. A-grade inventory, so that going back to that means I'm in a healthy inventory position. I'm not overstocked, I'm not understocked, I have a good amount relative to my lead times and present state. B-grade is it's starting to get a little old, and C-grade I've got way too much, it's deteriorating my cash position. So if we think about, we've got two axes here, okay? So this is kind of a fun, fancy graph, so I'm gonna talk through it. On the left side, I've got contribution margin per unit sold, okay? So that's a ratio metric on a unit basis. And on the far right, I've got total contribution dollars. So imagine I've got a batch of inventory that I ordered, and I want to examine both marketing strategies that both maximize the individual margin per unit as well as the total margin of the collective set of inventory. Well, the reality is the demand for each SKU I purchased is not the same. The demand for XL is not the same as small. The demand for purple is not the same as black. There's a different demand for each of them. But I have to discover it. Yes, in the beginning I have an estimation based on historicals, and the more data you have, the more accurate you get at this. But I have an estimation of that demand that I have to go into market and realize. And so there should be a sequential process to the realization of that demand. Oftentimes when we get a new batch of product in, we do all of these marketing things at the same time. We launch the email, we launch the ads, we do the SMS, we do the influencers, and we do it all at the same time. Okay? I would contend that there's an opportunity to sequence through it, especially if you're in the demand discovery phase. The more predictive you are about understanding the demand, the more that you can do those things simultaneously. But the best way to maximize the total dollars is to sequence through them like this. The first step, okay, is to try and sell all of it at full price with zero CAC. Okay, that's how you maximize the marginal per unit, right? If my graph line on the left there that goes up into the right, or kind of slopes down as we go, the best way to maximize the sale of every unit is to do it with zero CAC, right? How do I do that? That's emailing my existing customers, right? So if I can sell all the product to the customers I already have via a channel that costs no money, I've maximized the marginal value of every unit of sale. Now, if you notice, that's actually inversely related to the total contribution margin dollars, right? Because if I sold all the inventory just to the customers that I already had, I probably didn't satiate the total available demand in the market, right? Does that make sense? So if I sold out all of my product just from my email list, well, I didn't even try and run any ads on it. I didn't try and go any net new demand. There were more total dollars to be had, but that's where I maximize the marginal value. So I want to make sure I let them take up as much of that demand as possible. Now, the next action I take is full price with an above target CAC. Okay, so imagine now the next thing I go, okay, I gotta go get net new demand, but I wanna know how much there is at a really good CAC. Let's say my ROAS target is normally a 2-to-1 overall. I'm gonna start at 4-to-1. How much demand is there at 4-to-1 or 5-to-1? You can use cost controls, you can just use whatever targeting mechanism you want to set an above expectancy of efficiency. Because this is one of the things that we suffer from a lot, is we suffer from the local maxima problem, which is this idea that we assume all the time that for every SKU the CAC is the same based on the historical of our business. But maybe it's not. Maybe this product has more demand for it than previous ones. And so what if I set the bar of expectation when I went out to market first higher? I said I'm gonna start normally at a 5-to-1 instead of the 2-to-1 that I would do normally. Well, okay, I'm gonna take as much of that as I possibly can. Then when it dries up, I get through as much of that as possible. Now I move to full price at target CAC. Now I say, okay, I'll accept that 2-to-1, right? And what's happening is my total contribution dollars are climbing because I'm still setting that CAC at a profitable level. This still is profit, right? And you can see I've now moved up, my total contribution is growing, but my margin per unit is going down. You can see where this is headed. I'm moving out this curve where I go to discount at $0 CAC. So now before I go discount to net new customer acquisition, I might discount some of these SKUs to my existing customer base. I might send an email to some of my customers and say, hey, here's this special product that's starting to age on my inventory a little too much. I overestimated the demand. Here's a discount for you, my loyal special people customers. Then you go discount at above average CAC, right? So now you have to go to market. We were wrong about the demand. No one wanted it at full price. Rather than sitting that on your balance sheet and moving on, you gotta get rid of it. Okay, we're gonna discount a little bit. Maybe you start at 15%. Maybe you start at 20%. And you go out with your normal CAC, right? And you can see where this is headed. You just move out until eventually that dotted line there represents profitability. I will eventually sell these units at a loss. Why? Because I want the cash back to go buy more good inventory to make a better bet to get a better return. Because I delude myself into thinking I didn't lose by sitting it on the shelf and putting it on my balance sheet at full price. That's a lie. It's not real. Take the loss, get the cash, and reinvest. And so these two stars on this graph represent the point at which you have to make two strategic decisions. If you are trying to maximize EBITDA, total contribution dollars, you'll see that first star represents the point at which you stop. You don't move to liquidation. You carry it on your balance sheet a little bit longer. You come up with some reason why someday it's going to be awesome. We're going to do mystery boxes and whatever. But you maximize your total contribution. That's where your P&L is going to look the best. But if you want to put the dollars back in your pocket or you want to maximize cash, that's the second star. The second star is actually the point at which you will maximize cash for your business. Now, I want you to think, is this the kind of insight and understanding that my marketing team is acting with relative to my understanding of the business objective that we have? And I'm willing to bet that it's not. And it starts with the founders. It starts with you, the owner of the business, being clear on how you want to make money. And then inviting your team into creating impact against that business objective. Otherwise, they are going to be using proxy metrics that they heard on Twitter to produce some result that has nothing to do with what you want as a business. But it starts with you. And the lack of clarity that I see from founders about how they intend to make money in their business is mind-boggling. And I know it because I've been victim to it myself. We're just running. We're just selling. We're building. We're trying. The end, I don't know. We'll get there someday. Do I have any money? I don't know. I look at it sometimes. There's checking account says there's money in it, so I keep going. I don't know. Is it growing? I think so. What's the credit card out? I don't know. When was the last time I reconciled my balance sheet? Who knows? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to produce free cash flow so you can distribute money so you can put it in your pocket? Are you trying to grow your TTM EBITDA for the sake of that? What are you trying to do? Invite your marketing team into it. The tactics are wildly different relative to the objective. I cannot, as your e-commerce growth partner, help you if you don't know what you want. Because these are wildly different strategies. The amount of people that I walk in and we would have a discussion about how to manage their ad account without ever discussing the balance sheet is crazy. How can I know my marketing strategy without understanding where all your money is and how you intend to use it? It's insane. I can't. I have to understand all of it. And there's something very vulnerable about this. Because what I found is the balance sheet is where a lot of your bad decisions hide. It's those inventory POs that weren't that great, that are actually causing a lot of the pressure of the organization, is about the amount of cash you tied up in something that you don't really want people to see. Invite them into that and they can help you solve it. So that's what I have for you. 3 tactics to grow the bank account. Reach out to me on X at Taylor Holiday. I'd be happy to talk with you about this. I've got 10 minutes if you want any questions.
That was great.
Thanks.
Love the four-quarter stuff. Can you talk for a second about how you guide companies, especially growing ones, on payment terms?
Yeah. So payment terms are a huge leverage point that essentially what you're doing is you're passing the financing of your business onto your supplier, right? So the longer that you can get them to float your obligation to pay them, the better this whole cash conversion cycle gets, okay? Now, a lot of times people will think about that their job with their suppliers is to negotiate exclusively the cheapest cost of goods that they can get. That's the most obvious thing. It's like, oh, you want to charge me $4 a unit? I want $3.94 a unit, okay? But depending on the supplier, it might be better to say, well, what if I paid you $4.10 a unit, but you gave me net 60 on delivery? So you have these different ways of negotiating relative to supplier terms, relative to your own business needs and cash position. So again, what am I trying to solve for? If I'm cash rich, if I have a cheap line of credit that's legacy from there, then maybe I want to negotiate cost of goods as the best marginal action I can take. But if I don't have a lot of cash and I need that, then I need to go to my supplier, and it is better to give up some slight points of margin, pay more for the product in order to float the payment terms so that you don't have to pay for the product ahead of time. The best lever in the world is to get net on delivery, right? Meaning that I don't have to pay for the product until after I've received it and sold it. So fundamentally, at that point, now I'm just a middleman between the customer and the manufacturer, and I don't actually take any cash risk. That's the ideal state. So when you hear people talking about negative cash conversion cycle, that's what it means, right? Is I place a PO, I receive the product, I sell the product, and I pay them with that money because I have net 90 on delivery. Now, what I'll say is that manufacturers are going to see that relative to your credit risk. So the problem is credit worthiness, right? Like, do I believe you that you're actually going to pay me? So this is part of the problem with e-commerce is that early on, just like with a bank, you have no credit worthiness. So the question is, would you put up some sort of collateral for that process? Is there some way in which you can ensure them that they're going to be made whole if they take that risk? It also has to do with how big of a manufacturing partner you select. Can they afford that in their business to float you that? And what benefit do you have? So I think it's a huge leverage point that becomes central to really thinking about your business function. But again, what do you need? Do you need margin on the cost of goods basis to improve the P&L? Or do you have a cash problem and you have to go negotiate, and it'd be better to take slightly worse margin for better terms? So all of this is downstream, though, from that idea of what's the business strategy or problem I'm trying to solve, and then how do I use this unique thing for that? And there's also lots of great revenue-based financing. Inventory purchasing is actually one of the easier things to finance because, again, there's a collateral there. There's a unit that you can do. But, again, one of the things that often doesn't get included in a consideration for something like setting a CAC target is the cost of capital that I'm using. So if I have revenue-based financing, it's affecting my actual cost of goods, but that might show up below the line as an interest payment. And so that interest payment isn't considered into the cost of capital in what would be like a ROIC calculation. So if you do a ROIC calculation, you're going to have a consideration for the cost of capital, but you're not on a pure like marketing CAC basis. Those things often get disassociated. So there's lots there. Does that sort of give you some direction?
Yeah.
Cool.
Then everybody can hear me. Akin to that, how do pre-orders set into that mix? Let's say you're a new business, you can't get net 90, net 60, even net 30. Can you use pre-orders? Have you seen that work?
Yeah, so pre-orders have some interesting dynamics to them. One, if you can pull them off, they can be great. Now you're basically getting your customers to finance your POs, right? So again, you're trying to pass on that credit risk to somebody, but there's a few problems with pre-orders. One, there's legal limitations about the realization of the revenue, right? You often can't account for the revenue on your P&L until you've actually fulfilled the product. So there's just like a legal accounting problem. And then there's also the unaccounted for risk of cancellation of the order. So during COVID, this happened a lot for our partners that were in the furniture supply business, okay? Because furniture got so backed up on the supply chain side that they basically everything was a pre-order. But what they didn't know was based on the delay in the supply chain, because what happens is you tell your customer it's 6 weeks, and then all of a sudden, oh shit, it's 12 weeks. And when you send that, oh shit, 12 weeks email, what's the cancellation rate on the order at that time? And so modeling out that can be sometimes really challenging. So the question would be, what's your confidence in your fulfillment interview? What's the impact on conversion going to be relative to cost? Okay, and how confidently can you model out that conversion? And again, that's a great problem for solving cash problems, but not as much on the P&L because there's limitations in accounting for it. So different things, different.
Can I follow that up?
Yeah.
How do you see crowdfunding in that mix? Because then they cancel after 30.
Well, so right, so that's sort of the cancellation risk that comes with whether it's crowdfunding or pre-orders in terms of the customer's obligation to pay relative to the receipt of the product, and how often do they. Now, for a lot of the crowdfunding sites, they have pretty good data about the historical rates of cancellation that you can build into a model to be conservative. Where entrepreneurs get in trouble is when they start treating obligations to pay the same as money in their account. And then they go make a commitment off those dollars before the dollars have actually shown up. So I would just say that there's a big difference between someone telling you they're going to pay you and the money in your bank account, and I would act accordingly.
The slosh of all the private equity money and everything, and the rise of CAC over the years, what are the traits of you're seeing in companies? What are the traits of the companies that you're seeing with lower CACs these days?
There's one very, very obvious thing that is driving the disproportionate amount of success for customers. They have access to an organic audience. So if I am an influencer with 7 million followers on Instagram, I can offset CAC because I have access to an audience for free. And the brands that 40%, the one I showed you that has 40% operating margin at 50% income, it's an influencer-led supplement brand. And over again, that is the primary, like, what I like to say is that if your business is gonna make profit, you have to have margin leverage somewhere. On that 4-quarter accounting, just go through. How do you get margin on CAC? Or how do you get leverage on CAC? You have organic audience demand creation. I've also seen this in weird things where, like, we had a business that had started early on in the CrossFit space, and they had like the top SEO rank for CrossFit sports bra, CrossFit booty shorts, CrossFit blah, blah, blah. And that organic SEO thing was the tailwind that boosted their business for a long time. It was just leverage, free acquisition, free traffic, right? So on a CAC basis, there's some point at which you create that leverage. The second category, margin basis, okay? Well, how do you create margin leverage? You sell silicone wedding rings, was the last business that I started. You know what we bought it for? It was 4 cents to produce the product. We sold it for $20. You know what your CAC can be? Like basically $20 and you can still make money, right? So massive margin, but the problem with massive margin is that creates large-scale competition. They tend to get competed away really, really quick. So the other thing that creates leverage there is some sort of manufacturing moat that makes it difficult for people to access and compete. I don't know if you guys know Mark Ritz. He started a company called Carnivore Snacks. You may have seen him on Twitter. He just went through it. They dehydrate meat in a really cool way that produces the snack. The business was an absolute rocket ship and killing it. They just got shut down by the FDA for some of their manufacturing process. They had to go through all this testing, all this stuff to get back into market. They went through it and now they're in market, but what did they create? A giant barrier to entry relative to anybody else that has to go through that to get into market. Versus a silicone wedding ring, literally you guys could go buy like 1 million of them off Alibaba tomorrow, right? So on the manufacturing side, there's some sort of leverage, and then on the OpEx side, you create leverage by having a super lean team. You're a remote workforce. You have outsourced labor in different ways, whatever it might be. But in every part of the P&L, if you don't have some leverage point, some way in which you are uniquely able to access margin, it's going to be really hard. This business is really hard to produce profit. But the number one thing is organic right now is like people with organic audiences are driving massive leverage in acquisition.
You spoke about the importance of LTV when you were showing how profitability was compounding with those repeat purchases,
Yep.
right? So I'd ask you, in your experience across the number of brands you've worked with, what are the kind of characteristics of brands who have that repurchase rate, and
Yeah.
B, let's say a brand has a 30% moderate LTV off of that first purchase, right? What would be kind of the top things you'd recommend them try and implement to increase that back end?
Here's a really harsh reality. LTV is almost entirely a genetic component of the product more than it is a marketing tactic. We like to think as marketers we produce LTV, you almost never do. It's almost entirely dependent on the product category that you're in and the mechanism of consumption. So if I sell a consumable product, my LTV is going to be much higher than if I sell shoes. I've worked with 100 shoe brands, and the LTV is all roughly the same, somewhere between 30 to 50% in the year. So it just depends on the product category primarily. So it's a lot like, the way I describe it is like, there are some marketing metrics that are more like height, and there are some that are more like weight. The range of impact I can have on my height by eating healthy is not very much. The more that I can have on my weight is a lot more. LTV is a lot like height more than it is like weight. Now, that said, if you as a business want to improve your LTV, the primary mechanism for doing that is in merchandising, so designing new product, and offer concepting. So I'll give you an example. I own a skincare brand called Bamboo Earth. Okay, we sell, our number one product is Intense Cactus Concentrate. It's like a $70 moisturizer made from like prickly pear. And when we sold it, if you sell the full price, okay, the repeat rate in 60 days, which is a metric we care a lot about because it has a lot to do with cash flow, is really low. It's like 12% within 60 days, okay? So what we did is we designed a sample kit. So to solve for the less than ideal LTV, we made a smaller version of the product that allowed customers to sample. And we were able to acquire customers at roughly the same initial contribution value, but the repeat went to like 35% within 60 days. Same product, not a marketing tactic, an offer concept and merchandising solution. So if you think about more or less is a way to get an improvement of LTV. If you give someone more of a consumable product, bundle it, you can front load margin. Again, that's a cash tactic, not an LTV tactic, but again, those are all different things. So that's offer design and product design and merchandising is the number one way to improve LTV because it's primarily a characteristic of the product. Your post-purchase flows and all those things, they matter. They have marginal delta of impact that at large scale can be really important. I'm not going to diminish them, but you're not going to turn a 30% LTV product into 100% off of marketing tactics. It just won't happen. And then subscription is the ultimate answer. That's how you actually get real LTV is you obligate people to pay you every month that they forget about paying you.
Give it up for Taylor.